Hello, it's episode 192 of Security Weekly News Wrap-Up. It's really half that many, but it's the week of 27 February. We've got war, of course. What is it good for? Toyota, or Toyota as I typed it. DynamicWeb, open source, scams, Google, zero trust, along with all the show wrap-ups on the Security Weekly News.
This is Security Weekly. For security professionals, by security professionals.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
It's the show that keeps you up to date on the latest security news twice a week. Your trusted source for accurate security information and expert analysis. It's time for Security Weekly News. Monitoring and maintaining compliance is a never-ending struggle with a high price of failure. Firemon helps customers meet complex and varying compliance requirements. Firemon has fully customizable reporting, analytics, assessments, and dashboards to meet the compliance needs of any organization. With Firemon, compliance reports take a tenth of the time, and real-time continuous compliance eliminates the anxiety and headaches of audit preparation. Improve security outcomes by improving security operations with Firemon. Visit securityweekly.com/Firemon to learn more. Cybercriminals are working overtime. Last year in the fourth quarter alone, phishing attacks disguised as COVID testing information increased by 521%. Barracuda has identified 13 types of email threats and how cybercriminals use them to steal money from your company or personal information from your employees and customers. Find out about the 13 email threat types and how Barracuda can provide complete email protection for your teams, your customers, and your reputation. Get your free ebook at securityweekly.com/Barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/Barracuda.
All right, I'm Doug White, and this is Security Weekly News and a wrap-up show on Application Security Weekly number 186. John and Mike first talked to Steve Wilson, who's the Chief Product Officer at Contrast Security. Steve was on talking about DevOps teams and how really a lot of security tools don't actually address any of their needs at all. The conversation was around pretty much how do you adapt the security tools that you have to meet the needs of DevOps people. In the second segment, they had the AppSec news. On Business Security Weekly number 252, Jason, Matt, and Tyler had our friend Fleming Shee on the show. Fleming is the CTO at Barracuda Networks. This segment was talking about all the ransomware that we saw last year, and then they went on and started talking about what kind of ransomware you're going to be seeing in 2022. It's very evolutionary, and so interesting segment, and Fleming's always fun to talk with. In the second segment, the business security news. On Enterprise Security Weekly 263, Adrian, Katie, and Tyler had Chad Skipper, the global security technologist, and Karen Wurstel, the senior cybersecurity strategist of both from VMware, on the show. And they were on to talk about a very interesting thing to me, which was how the majority of the cloud, like 90% of it, runs on Linux, but most security countermeasures focus on Windows-based threats. And I really thought that was an interesting topic because, honestly, I never really thought about it like that. And, we've always had that sort of Linux is, Linux is not really worried about malware and things because people don't focus on it. But the cloud is making that, I think, a much bigger issue than it ever has been in the past. In the second segment, Sharon Goldberg, the CEO and co-founder of Bastion Zero, Inc., was on the show. That segment was about zero trust. There was another news article this week about zero trust as well, which is kind of interesting. But they were talking about the recommendations the U.S. government made about this back in January. They talked about what zero trust really means. And they also went on and talked about architecture of zero trust and how you actually do it. In the third segment, they had the enterprise security news. On the Security Weekly News, number 191, Jason Wood was on to talk about Foxblade, which was a piece of malware that was used to hit the Ukraine prior to the kinetic invasion. And he was really talking a lot about Mick Douglas's Twitter threat of actions that we really ought to be taking right now as this war in Europe and so forth has really started bringing home how much cyber warfare is going to be involved going forward. On Paul's Security Weekly number 730, first up was the security news, which they've been doing that earlier lately. On the second segment, Alyssa Torres, a senior threat hunter at Palo Alto, joined the show to talk about mock interviews and how it really critical prep, particularly for job hunting in cyber. And I assure you, I can attest to that. Alyssa has been delivering a lot of talks and training about this lately and had pointers for job seekers. So you might want to check this out if you're new to the industry, if you're planning to enter the industry, or even if you've been here for a long time and you're planning to change jobs or interview for a job. I interview quite a few people for positions, and let me tell you, some people need to do some practice because, when you get those interview questions and they go like, so what kind of programming languages do you like? And the person goes, I don't know. Like, I don't know. Like, there's, like languages, I guess, and I mean, some of the people I've interviewed, I think actually were a lot better than they came across. So it's definitely worth practicing. And the third segment on Wednesday night, Richard Mogul, the CISO for Disrupt Ops at Firemon, joined Paul and Josh to talk about the differences in managing policies when you're dealing with on-premises network environments, and then what happens when that's a 100% cloud-based environment. So pretty interesting thing. They talked about stuff like SASE and SD-WAN and how that's expanding network access across the globe. So my thread of the week is going to be misinformation. And I some of these come back around, but I read these stories and I just start thinking about it. And I got to admit, it's getting harder to discern what's live and what is Memorex, to quote a dated ad. I mean, as we've all seen, Russia is using every approach from, shooting bullets out of guns, the sort of traditional model, to all sorts of different cyber warfare and disinformation, misinformation tactics to push out false information about the Ukraine and what's happening there. Published claims seems to be contradicted by Instagram photos of information to the contrary, but, you could fake those too. So, I mean, you could have fake Instagram photos contradicting fake information about other information, and pretty much nobody knows what's really going on. So if Russia's faking the news and we're faking the news and everyone we disagree with is faking the news, well, it seems to add up to a lot of fake news and misinformation, and that's really dangerous. I mean, for instance, last night, I was at the airport and I saw these airport delays, and I mean, that's nothing new, but I noticed that a lot of airports had delays at midnight, which was kind of strange. And all the reasons on that map, and this were like weird stuff too, like bird strikes and air shows and the term outage. And all these flights were delayed because the one I was waiting for was delayed. But I was like, I didn't really trust the source. I mean, and the source was FAA flight delays, which is the Federal Aviation Administration site. I mean, was it accurate, or was they were doing misinformation on purpose, or was it hacked, or was it real? Was there really an air show at Charlotte at midnight last night that was causing a 2-hour delay? That's what it said. It said there's a huge delay at Charlotte, and it was like, it said air show is the reason. And I'm like, I really don't think there was an air show there last night, and there wasn't an air show this morning. So what was all these stuff? I mean, there were no news stories today. Was it the Illuminati? Was it the Russians? QAnon? I don't know. I mean, no wonder people get so taken in by conspiracies, because it's really hard to tell what's true and what's false. I was sitting there looking at this map in my car with half the major airports in the United States showing some kind of significant delay due to an air show at midnight. And I'm wondering, is the FAA hacked? The website hacked? The federal government covering up an invasion by body-snatching weasel people? Maybe. I mean, I don't know. Really, what was it? No news. Nothing. So maybe it was the Russians. Maybe it was a guy named Marco in Long Island. Or maybe it was somebody spilling lemon custard on a server rack. Hard to say. Only your hairdresser knows for sure here on Dated Ad Week. But it gets harder to tell. I mean, it starts to make me sound like an old guy shouting at clouds on the front porch like, I see you. I do. I know what you did. You're going to pay. You clouds think you own the place, but that ain't true. I mean, but there was a time when you felt like and maybe it was all a big lie then too, but you at least felt like that guy on the evening news was kind of telling the truth. I mean, when Walter Cronkite said the war in Vietnam is at a stalemate, I can't even do his voice. Everybody didn't immediately start saying that's fake news. That it's a lie, and we don't agree with that. We're actually winning. And there wasn't immediately a counter news network saying, no, that's all lies. We're winning. In fact, we've already won. In fact, Vietnam is now the 51st state. Lyndon Johnson wasn't on TV 5 minutes later claiming that Cronkite was a semi-intelligent gas from Pluto who was trying to manipulate Americans into voting for tax increases on billionaires. Of course, then again, when Walter Cronkite said that the war was in a stalemate after the Tet Offensive in 1968, and no, I'm not that old, but I can read, thank you very much, it caused opinions to change, and I guess you could argue that maybe that one statement from Walter Cronkite changed the whole course of the war. People say that, not clear. But today, I mean, little effort is even made to tell the truth. I mean, people tune into networks specifically because they tell you what you want to hear. Hire a PR firm, tell them what they want to hear. Hey, you don't like people from Ogallala, Nebraska? Me neither. That's why I'm running for office, to keep those shifty bastards on the other side of the border and keep Julesburg safe from their creepy foreign ways. What with their cheese and their Ford pickup trucks, who knows what kind of sneaky stuff those people are going to get up to. My daddy used to say, never trust a man from Ogallala. They got too many teeth, and it's the truth. Anyway, so what is news? What is Russian? What's coming from some 16-year-old kid who posted a video on TikTok? It's hard to tell. I mean, you have to do all kinds of due diligence, and even that may not prove truthful. If the Times has it, and it's also in the Sun or the Daily Bugle, was it just on the cover of the National Enquirer and they're all quoting it? The problem is those things are all very hard to discern. Circular logic's always been a problem, but today it's penultimate. I mean, some kid on TikTok says that panda bears are really made out of 3 wombats in a panda suit. So that goes viral. It's repeated. It's a feel-good story. The Daily Bugle picks it up. That gets quoted in Good Times Magazine. And 12 days later, there's a congressional hearing calling for building a wall along the Chinese border to prevent sneaky wombats from coming into the country. And, yeah, a lot of people probably don't even know that we don't have a border with China. But, you know, that doesn't matter because we're telling them what they want to hear, that sneaky wombats are coming across the Chinese border, and who knows what they're going to be up to. Fake news must be a commie puke. Open your eyes, sheeple. And round it goes. So what's the answer? Well, at least in part, we need to start figuring out what are reliable news sources, vetting them, and trying to ensure that we actually know what is news and what is entertainment and what is actually going on. There's too many secrets, indeed. Patty Chayefsky had it on the spot back in 1976, and I guess if I could start foaming at the mouth and have a seizure on camera, we'd have a lot better ratings. But, you know, oh well, are we at DEFCON 3 yet? I'm not sure. Hard to tell. Maybe we're DEFCON 2. Beats me. Anyway, and now the news. Toyota, yes, that Toyota, had to shut down 14 production plants for at least a day due to a system failure in components at a supplier called Kojima Industries. The shutdown is expected to lead to a 5% drop in monthly production, which doesn't sound like that bad, but it actually is. I mean, this is more of another supply chain type issue because companies like Toyota and most other manufacturers have long since put in place what's called just-in-time inventory, and, you know, so that just as you need them, things are arriving, hence the name. And, well, you know, you don't need a warehouse full of parts all of a sudden. There's speculation that this may have been a Russian-based attack due to Japan's support of the Ukraine, but Kojima makes plastic parts and electronic components that are used in Toyota manufacturing, and they reputedly suffered some sort of cyber attack. It's not been revealed exactly what all that means yet. I think this is just further reinforcement that you need to have a strong security posture, and, you know, And that way, when that supply of vodka and Red Bull dries up, well, you know, programming comes to a screeching halt. So you better be ready to have some kind of alternate in place. Me personally, if my coffee maker doesn't produce 4 shots of espresso right away in the morning, we're not having the news today. Or at least it's going to be really slow news. Like, you know, news. DynamicWeb is a popular set of tools that provides content management, digital marketing, and e-commerce. Asset Note researchers found a vulnerability in that suite of tools that would allow someone to gain privilege and do remote code execution via that application on the hosting server. In the blog post about this, the attacker the demonstration was that the attacker could add a new admin account with full admin access to the e-commerce installation. And of course, that, you know, that allows you to upload a web shell. Well, we all know what happens then. Shubham Shah, who found this bug, said that it was very hard to locate the bug, but it was very easy to exploit. The bug apparently, this is the sort of interesting part to me, the bug was introduced into the code back in 2018, but was only patched in February 22 when it was actually discovered. So if you're on branch 9 anything, you've probably been vulnerable since 2018. That was what they said. So, you know, There are hot fixes available now, and DynamicWeb, well, as you might guess, advises that you apply them. So, yeah, get to it. Linux Foundation and Harvard's Lab for Innovation Science released rankings of the top 500 open source projects, which begins a really long process toward trying to understand supply chain in code and the subsequent chain vulnerabilities that result, where a lib is used in an app, which is used in an API, which is used in a Lambda, that's then used in an app that is used by a software tool and that is then sold to you, dear customer. The project is called Census 2 of free and open source software. Only academics could come up with a name like that. I don't even think the acronym spells anything. COFOS. Or CFOS. Yeah, CFOS maybe. That probably means something bad in Persian. I hope I didn't just offend a whole part of the world. Anyway, and it actually has a dash at the end of it with application libraries after that. But they did go ahead and rank the top 500 packages from the two main branches of this stuff, which are JavaScript-based Node Package Manager, or NPM as it's known, and the non-NPM focused world, which includes Maven, Python Package Index, which is called PyPy or PyPal. I don't know how you say it, or if you even say it, but the Python Package Index, and NuGet. I don't know how to say that one either. I know what they are, but I've never heard anybody say them. That's why my grandmother, who was deaf, always said Gime for Jim, and Video. But the list includes packages used directly as well as indirect usage and how all those added up. So they were trying to put together a list to show you what the number one stuff that's being used is. They also used a telemetry package, which was determining which ones were being implemented, especially when they were being used in other apps. So all this sort of this stuff I was just talking about. This is part of an ongoing initiative that was triggered by things like Log4j and SolarWinds and all these other issues, where a sub issue actually led to the compromise of the end product. And this is going to continue to plague this industry for a long time. I mean, we've been embedding things for as long as we've been programming. And with the addition of things like GitHub and Python Package Index and things like that, it's really, an issue. And it's going to take a lot of time to start understanding what all is there. Now, certainly, President Joe Biden in the United States made some executive orders saying you're going to fix this and you're going to do it quick. That doesn't mean it's necessarily going to get done. And the SBOM, or the software bill of materials requirements that are now being pushed out on government contractors, are pressuring firms to examine this. But every day, even as we speak, maybe some of you are embedding code from GitHub and Python Package Index and so on. And as Augustus de Morgan said back way in the 19th century, big fleas have little fleas upon their backs to bite them. Yeah. That gets attributed to other people, but it was actually Augustus who said it first, supposedly. I will reiterate that you should likely advise your people about scams related to the Ukraine. I haven't seen so much unified support against Russia since, I guess the Cold War. And of course, the more unified everyone is, the more likely they are to get scammed. So a lot of people outraged by the invasion of the Ukraine are getting hit with all sorts of scams. And I just picked this particular article to point it out. This particular one was related to a phishing attack that targeted EU government employees who are managing logistics for refugees fleeing the Ukraine. The attack followed waves of attacks in the Ukraine itself, and of course waves now of scams that are being pushed out all over the world for people saying, you want to help the Ukraine, do you want to support Ukrainian refugees, click here to donate money to me, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of that happened before the kinetic invasion even got started, but now that it's going on, you're seeing all kinds of stuff happening. The attack, this particular one, was attributed to TA-445 Ghostwriter, which is linked with the government of Belarus, which is a Russian puppet state. I sound like a reporter in the 60s getting to say Russian puppet state. Hey, Bob, pass me a carton of Chesterfields and send up a couple of ladies from the steno pool while I write up this story on the commies. And hand me some other, if I had an unfiltered cigarette to wave around, we'd be all set. But anyway, the phishing email was based on a ukr.net address, which is the address of the Russian or the Ukrainian military. And it was apparently a compromised account for a unit based in Chernihiv. I have no idea how to say that in the Ukraine. Sorry, Ukrainian friends. The attack contains a macro-filled spreadsheet that installs malware on the victim system, but there's tons of these scams going on right now, and targeting the general public, the military, government employees, and so on. So it may be not a bad idea to refresh everybody's understanding of how these kind of scams work. Google ceased running its ad business in Russia, which is the latest trend to protest the invasion of the Ukraine. Google paused all search, YouTube, display network ads, etc. early today. Airbnb had paused its business in Russia, I think, yesterday, and they also paused all business in Belarus following, and all that was on the heels of Apple's announcement earlier this week that they were going to stop selling iPhones and other computers in Russia and Belarus. So it really is going to be like the 60s in Russia all over again, where they have all these things that kind of look like Western things, but they're not exactly the same thing. I mean, you may have to buy a Trabant instead of a Ford or an Ayepa. I again apologize to all my Russian friends for mispronouncing turnip instead of an iPhone. The new I wasn't sure how to say that, but I gave it a shot. But the drama continues. But I really wouldn't mind having a Gaz 24 Volga. Those are pretty cool, right? And or a Jock. I think that's a Polish-made vehicle, but all those good old Iron Curtain vehicles. They used to make those things that looked just like 55 Chevys, but they were actually like Russian-made. Yeah, they're pretty cool. A study from the Register had results from 500 respondents regarding zero trust. This is an interesting study. I mentioned it earlier when we were talking about Paul's Security Weekly. About 10% of the tech people who responded to this study said they had no awareness of what zero trust actually was. The article goes on to report on this whole study about implementation and understanding of zero trust. Only about 13%, they have a lot of details here that I'm not going to get into, but only about 13% of the teams had implemented any sort of zero trust. So a very small number. 32% of the respondents said they actually knew nothing about any sort of vendor offerings of zero trust, and less than a tenth of them said they had a solid understanding of knowledge of this issue. So that's a pretty sad finding, and that they weren't, not only were they not using it, but they didn't really even know what it was or how to implement it or even what was out there being sold. So in terms of zero trust, we have a long way to go. I mean, it's an important idea, but we definitely need to consider, how do we get there? And finally, imagine if we spent all the money that we spend on war and killing people on science instead. Wouldn't that be something? I mean, really. But sadly, it's not the case. The ExoMars rover, which was a joint project with the European Space Agency, and you guessed it, the other partner in that was Russia. It had already been delayed due to the pandemic, and now with the invasion of the Ukraine, it's probably put a nail in the coffin of the Exo rover. The European Space Agency said they were fully implementing sanctions on the Russian participants, and said that made a launch this year, of any sort of rover to the red planet very unlikely. The original launch date was supposed to be this fall, and the rover would have joined NASA's two rovers that are already there, and there's a Chinese rover already cruising around Mars doing that. God damn, I hate war. And that's the wrap up for the week of 27 February 2022. I'm Doug White. We'll see you next week on the Security Weekly News.